15 years ago, twin brothers Michael and Matthew Harrison, 22, vanished without a trace after leaving their construction job in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, plunging their family into an abyss of tragedy and despair and leaving their tight-knit community in stunned confusion. The disappearance of the Harrison twins on that cold November evening in 2009 would become one of Oak Ridge's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a case that would test the limits of parental love and expose the devastating cracks in a system meant to protect and serve. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. Robert and Linda Harrison had raised their boys to be inseparable, two halves of the same soul, their neighbors often said. Michael, older by 12 minutes, was the protective one, always watching out for his brother. Matthew was the dreamer, the one who believed in second chances and saw good in everyone. Both worked for Henderson Construction, a family-owned company that had been building Oak Ridge for 3 generations. That Tuesday, November 17, 2009, started like any other. The twins clocked out at 5:30 p.m., their supervisor, Jake Morrison, watching them walk toward Michael's blue Ford pickup truck in the company parking lot. It would be the last confirmed sighting of the Harrison brothers alive. When the twins failed to return home for dinner, a sacred ritual in the Harrison household where Linda prepared their favorite pot roast every Tuesday, Robert knew something was terribly wrong. The boys had never missed a family dinner without calling. Never. By 9 p.m., with no word and no answered calls, Robert drove the familiar routes between the construction site and their home, his heart sinking with each empty mile. Linda called every friend, every relative, every place the twins might have gone. The phone calls that night painted a picture of 2 young men who had simply evaporated into the Tennessee mountain air. The Oak Ridge Police Department initially treated the case as a missing persons report, suggesting the 22-year-old twins might have gone on an impromptu trip or gotten into some kind of trouble. Detective Sarah Chen, newly assigned to the case, interviewed co-workers and friends, but every lead led to the same conclusion. Michael and Matthew Harrison had no enemies, no debts, no reasons to disappear voluntarily. Their bank accounts remained untouched, their social media silent, their cell phones dead. The blue Ford pickup was found 3 days later in the parking lot of Norris Dam State Park, 20 miles from the construction site, with no signs of struggle but also no signs of where the brothers had gone. The investigation that followed would become a masterclass in bureaucratic negligence and small-town politics. Evidence was mishandled, witnesses were interviewed only once, and crucial security footage from local businesses was allowed to be recorded over before it could be properly analyzed. The case that should have been Oak Ridge's top priority became just another file in an overworked department's cabinet. Robert Harrison, a man who had spent his life trusting the system, watched as his sons became statistics, their faces eventually removed from the bulletin boards to make room for newer tragedies. The Harrison family's world collapsed in slow motion. Linda, once the vibrant heart of their social circle, withdrew into herself, spending hours staring at the twins' childhood photos and refusing to change their bedroom, as if keeping everything exactly as they left it might somehow summon them home. Robert quit his job at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory to dedicate himself to the search, plastering missing person flyers across 3 counties and driving hundreds of miles to follow up on every supposed sighting, every psychic's vision, every cruel hoax that promised answers, but delivered only deeper despair. The first year brought a flurry of activity. Search parties combed the dense forests around Norris Lake, volunteers dragged the murky waters, and bloodhounds followed scent trails that led nowhere. The local news covered the story extensively, the twins' high school graduation photo becoming a familiar sight on evening broadcasts. But as months passed without breakthroughs, media attention waned, volunteers stopped showing up, and the Harrison family found themselves fighting an increasingly lonely battle against time and indifference. Detective Chen, despite her genuine commitment to the case, faced the harsh realities of a small police department with limited resources. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was called in twice, but without concrete evidence of foul play, their involvement remained minimal. The case files grew thinner instead of thicker, filled more with dead ends than discoveries. By year 3, Chen had been reassigned to other cases, and the Harrison twins became a cold case managed by whoever had time between active investigations. Robert's obsession with finding his sons cost him his marriage. Linda, unable to bear the weight of constant hoping and failing, moved to her sister's house in Knoxville in 2013. She couldn't watch her husband destroy himself chasing ghosts, couldn't live in a house that had become a shrine to the missing. Their divorce was finalized quietly, another casualty of the twins' disappearance. Robert remained in the family home alone, surrounded by memories and unanswered questions, maintaining a website called Find Michael and Matthew that received fewer and fewer visitors each year. The community that had once rallied around the Harrison family gradually moved on. New tragedies demanded attention, new families needed support, and the story of the vanished twins became local folklore, a cautionary tale parents told their children about, always letting someone know where they were going. Annual vigils dwindled from hundreds of attendees to dozens, then to just Robert standing alone by Norris Lake, each November 17th, holding 2 photographs and refusing to accept that his sons might never come home. By 2024, Robert Harrison had become Oak Ridge's ghost, a gaunt figure in his late 60s who spent his days walking the same routes the twins might have taken, his nights updating a blog that few people read. His hair had gone completely white, his hands shook from too much coffee and too little sleep, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who had stared into an abyss for 15 years. The new generation of Oak Ridge residents knew him as the crazy old man who talked to anyone who would listen about his missing sons, while older residents crossed the street to avoid conversations that reminded them of their community's greatest failure. On a humid morning in July 2024, Robert was following one of his regular search patterns along the banks of Clinch River when the sunlight caught something metallic wedged between 2 fallen logs near the water's edge. His heart, which had learned to guard against hope, began to race as he waded into the shallow water. The object was a silver chain, tarnished by years of exposure but still recognizable. Engraved on the small pendant were the words, "M&M Brothers Forever," a gift Linda had given the twins on their 18th birthday, a reference to their shared initials and their mother's pet name for them. Robert's hands trembled as he held the chain up to the light. This wasn't another false lead, another cruel coincidence. This was real, tangible proof that his sons had been here, in this place that had been searched dozens of times over the years. The logical part of his mind wondered how so many search parties had missed something so obvious, but the father in him was already running toward his car, already dialing the Oak Ridge Police Department, already demanding that someone, anyone, take him seriously after 15 years of being treated like a delusional old man. Detective Marcus Webb, who had inherited the cold case file when Chen retired, initially approached Robert's discovery with the weary skepticism of an officer who had dealt with too many grieving relatives grasping at straws. But when he saw the chain, when he matched the photos in the file to the jewelry in his hands, Webb realized that the Harrison case was about to be reactivated in a way no one had anticipated. The pendant would be sent for DNA analysis. The area around the discovery site would be treated as a potential crime scene, and for the first time in over a decade, the disappearance of Michael and Matthew Harrison would receive the full attention of law enforcement. As Robert stood by the riverbank watching crime scene technicians photograph and measure every inch of ground around where he'd found the chain, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, hope mixed with terror. The chain was proof that his sons had been here, but it was also proof that something terrible had happened to them. After 15 years of not knowing, Robert Harrison was about to learn that sometimes the truth is more devastating than the mystery, and that some answers come with a price too terrible to imagine. The forensic analysis of the chain would take 3 weeks, but Detective Webb wasn't waiting for lab results to begin his investigation. The discovery site along Clinch River became the epicenter of the most intensive police operation Oak Ridge had seen since the twins first disappeared. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies in the soil composition 30 yards from where Robert found the chain, and cadaver dogs showed interest in the same area. What they unearthed on August 15, 2024, would prove that the Harrison family's worst nightmares had been buried just miles from their home for 15 years. The first remains were found 18 inches below the surface, wrapped in what appeared to be construction tarps, the same heavy-duty plastic sheeting used by Henderson Construction. Webb's stomach churned as he realized the implications. Someone with access to construction materials had buried the Harrison twins, and that someone had chosen this remote location for a reason. The skeletal remains were carefully excavated by a team from the University of Tennessee's Forensic Anthropology Center, each bone photographed and catalogued with the precision of archaeologists uncovering ancient artifacts. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the forensic anthropologist leading the excavation, confirmed what Robert Harrison had dreaded for 15 years. The remains belonged to two young males, approximately 22 years old, who had died around 2009. Dental records would provide definitive identification within days, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The twins had been found, but not in the way their father had hoped during all those sleepless nights of searching. The cause of death sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Both skulls showed evidence of blunt force trauma, not the random violence of a robbery gone wrong, but the deliberate, repeated strikes of someone who had wanted the Harrison twins dead. Dr. Martinez's preliminary report suggested the brothers had been killed elsewhere and transported to the burial site, explaining why no blood evidence or signs of struggle had ever been found at Norris Dam State Park, where their truck was abandoned. Webb found himself staring at crime scene photos that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The Harrison twins had been buried side by side, Michael's protective arm still draped across his brother's remains, a final gesture of brotherly love that had survived 15 years underground. The detective, a father of twin daughters himself, had to step away from the excavation site twice to compose himself. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was a violation of everything sacred about family bonds and human dignity. The news of the discovery spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. Robert Harrison, who had spent 15 years being treated as a delusional old man, was suddenly vindicated in the most terrible way possible. Linda Harrison drove from Knoxville that same day, arriving at the crime scene as the last of the remains were being carefully transported to the state medical examiner's office. The divorced couple stood together for the first time in over a decade, holding each other and weeping for the sons they would never embrace again, united once more by grief and the bitter satisfaction of finally knowing the truth. With confirmation that the Harrison twins had been murdered, Detective Webb faced a 15-year-old crime scene that had been contaminated by weather, wildlife, and time. The original investigation files, which had seemed thorough in 2009, now appeared criminally inadequate. Key witnesses had moved away or died, physical evidence had been lost or destroyed, and the trail that should have been followed immediately after the disappearance had gone cold decades ago. Webb began by re-interviewing everyone who had been connected to the original case, starting with Jake Morrison, the construction supervisor who had been the last person to see the twins alive. Morrison, now 58 and managing his own contracting business, seemed genuinely shocked by the news of the murders. He remembered the Harrison boys as reliable workers, never late, never in trouble, the kind of employees every supervisor wished they could clone. But when pressed about the days leading up to their disappearance, Morrison's memory became frustratingly vague. The detective's instincts were sharpened by 15 years of experience that the original investigators had lacked. He noticed Morrison's nervous habits, the way he avoided eye contact when discussing the company's financial troubles in 2009, his insistence on showing Webb character references from clients, his repeated mentions of how much he had liked and respected the twins. In Webb's experience, innocent people didn't feel the need to oversell their relationships with victims. Henderson Construction had been struggling financially in 2009, Webb discovered through old bank records and court filings. The company had been 3 months behind on payroll, facing lawsuits from suppliers, and desperately bidding on government contracts to stay afloat. Several employees had been laid off just weeks before the twins disappeared, creating tension and resentment among the remaining workers. Webb began to construct a timeline that painted a very different picture than the one presented in the original investigation. The breakthrough came when Webb located Sarah Kim, a former Henderson Construction bookkeeper who had moved to California in 2010. Kim, now working as an accountant in Los Angeles, had been reluctant to get involved in the reopened case, but the news of the twins' murders had shaken her conscience. During a phone interview that Webb recorded with her permission, Kim revealed information that would redirect the entire investigation toward the dark heart of Oak Ridge's construction industry. There was money missing, Kim told Webb, her voice barely above a whisper even after 15 years. A lot of money. Government contract money that was supposed to go to worker safety improvements and environmental compliance. Mike and Matt were asking questions about the payroll discrepancies, about why their overtime wasn't being calculated correctly. They weren't the type to let things slide, especially when it affected other workers' families. The Harrison twins, it appeared, had stumbled upon a scheme involving the embezzlement of federal funds, allocated for Oak Ridge National Laboratory construction projects. The contracts were worth millions of dollars, money that was supposed to ensure worker safety and environmental protection at one of the nation's most sensitive nuclear facilities. Instead, someone had been systematically stealing from programs designed to protect the very workers who were building America's nuclear future. If this case has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps Michael and Matthew's story reach more people. Webb's investigation into the financial irregularities at Henderson Construction revealed a corruption scheme that extended far beyond simple embezzlement. The missing federal funds had been diverted through a network of shell companies and inflated invoices, creating a paper trail that led directly to some of Oak Ridge's most prominent citizens. The Harrison twins hadn't just discovered missing money, they had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that could have destroyed careers, ended political aspirations, and sent several powerful men to federal prison. The detective's examination of Michael Harrison's personal effects, stored for 15 years in the family garage, yielded a crucial piece of evidence that the original investigation had overlooked. Hidden inside Michael's toolbox was a small notebook containing handwritten calculations, photocopied invoices, and what appeared to be a record of conversations with other workers about payroll discrepancies. The notebook was filled with Michael's meticulous handwriting, documenting irregularities in overtime payments, missing safety equipment funds, and suspicious increases in administrative costs. Webb realized that Michael Harrison had been conducting his own informal investigation in the weeks before the twins' disappearance. Phone records from 2009 showed that Michael had made several calls to the Department of Labor's fraud hotline and had scheduled a meeting with a federal investigator for November 20th, 2009, 3 days after he and his brother vanished. The twins had been murdered not in a moment of rage or during a random crime, but as part of a calculated effort to silence witnesses who threatened to expose a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The list of people who had known about Michael's investigation was disturbingly short. Jake Morrison knew, because Michael had approached him first, hoping to resolve the issues internally before involving federal authorities. Henderson Construction's owner, David Henderson Jr., knew because Morrison had informed him of Michael's concerns, and according to Sarah Kim's testimony, at least 2 other company executives had been present during heated discussions about the twins' troublemaking in the days before their disappearance. Webb's investigation took a darker turn when he discovered that David Henderson Jr. had died in a single car accident in 2018, driving his Mercedes off a mountain road in conditions that weren't particularly treacherous. The accident report, filed by the same Oak Ridge Police Department that had mishandled the twins' case, concluded that Henderson had fallen asleep at the wheel. No toxicology report was ordered, no investigation into Henderson's mental state was conducted, and the case was closed within a week. The detective began to see a pattern of convenient deaths and disappeared witnesses that suggested the corruption scheme had been protected by something more sinister than simple greed. Former Henderson Construction employees had died in accidents, moved away suddenly, or simply refused to discuss their time with the company. The few who agreed to speak with Webb painted a picture of a workplace where asking too many questions was dangerous, where federal contracts were treated as personal piggy banks, and where the Harrison twins' integrity had signed their death warrants. As Webb dug deeper into Oak Ridge's construction industry connections with the National Laboratory, he discovered that the stolen funds hadn't just been used for personal enrichment. Some of the money had been funneled into political campaigns, creating a web of obligation and silence that reached into the highest levels of local government. The Harrison twins had been killed not just to protect individual criminals, but to preserve an entire system of corruption that had been operating in the shadows of America's nuclear industry for years. The realization that his sons had died because they were honest, because they couldn't stand by and watch working families be cheated out of their wages, filled Robert Harrison with a mixture of pride and rage that would have torn a lesser man apart. Michael and Matthew Harrison hadn't been random victims. They had been murdered for having the courage to do what was right, killed by people who valued money more than human life. The breakthrough that would finally crack the Harrison case came from an unexpected source, Jake Morrison's conscience. 3 months after the twins' remains were discovered, Morrison appeared at Detective Webb's office without an appointment, looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His hands shook as he placed a sealed envelope on Webb's desk, containing evidence that would expose the true architect of Michael and Matthew Harrison's murders. "I've carried this for 15 years, Morrison said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I was supposed to destroy it after they died, but I couldn't. I kept thinking their parents deserved to know the truth, but I was too scared. Now that you've found them, I can't live with this anymore. Every night I see their faces. Every morning I wake up knowing I'm a coward and a murderer." Inside the envelope were copies of emails and text messages between Morrison and Thomas "Tommy" Caldwell, Oak Ridge's former mayor and current city council member. Caldwell, a charismatic politician who had built his career on promises of bringing federal dollars to the community, had been the silent partner in the Henderson construction corruption scheme. The communications revealed a chilling timeline. Caldwell had been informed about Michael Harrison's investigation on November 14, 2009, and had ordered the twins' elimination 3 days later. The messages painted a picture of cold calculation that made Webb's blood run cold. "The Harrison problem needs permanent solution," read one text from Caldwell to Morrison. "Can't have federal investigation destroying everything we've built. Handle it tonight. Make it look like they ran off or had an accident. Whatever it takes." Morrison had responded with a single word: done. The twins had died, not in a moment of passion, but as part of a business decision made by men who viewed human life as an acceptable cost of protecting their financial interests. Morrison's confession revealed the horrific details of that November night in 2009. He had lured the twins to the Norris Dam area under the pretense of discussing their concerns privately, away from the construction site where other workers might overhear. Michael and Matthew had trusted their supervisor, believing he wanted to help them resolve the payroll issues that were affecting their co-workers' families. Instead, they had walked into an ambush, orchestrated by Morrison and 2 hired men from Atlanta, professional killers who had left town immediately after burying the bodies. "I told them we were meeting a federal investigator who wanted to hear their side of the story," Morrison confessed to Webb, tears streaming down his face. "They were excited, you know. They thought they were finally going to get justice for all the workers being cheated." Michael brought his notebook with all the evidence he'd collected. He was so proud of the work he'd done, so convinced that right would win over wrong. "That's what killed me the most. Their faith that good people would listen and do the right thing." The revelation that Tommy Caldwell had ordered the murders sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge's political establishment. Caldwell had served as mayor during the critical years when federal nuclear contracts were being awarded, using his position to ensure that Henderson Construction received preferential treatment in exchange for kickbacks channeled through his wife's consulting firm. The stolen funds had financed Caldwell's political campaigns, his family's lavish lifestyle, and a network of influence that had protected the corruption scheme for over a decade. Webb discovered that Caldwell's corruption extended far beyond simple embezzlement. The politician had been systematically undermining federal oversight of Oak Ridge's nuclear facilities, ensuring that safety inspections were cursory and environmental monitoring was minimal. The money stolen from worker protection programs had funded everything from Caldwell's son's Ivy League education to a vacation home in the Bahamas. Every luxury the Caldwell family enjoyed had been paid for with money meant to keep nuclear workers safe. Webb worked with federal prosecutors to build an airtight case against Caldwell, knowing that a man with his resources and connections would hire the best defense attorneys money could buy. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, recorded phone calls between conspirators, and Morrison's detailed confession providing the prosecution with an insider's account of the entire operation. But the most damning evidence came from Michael Harrison's notebook, which contained documentation of irregularities that matched perfectly with the federal audit findings from the contracts in question. The arrest of Thomas Caldwell on October 12, 2024, brought hundreds of residents to the Oak Ridge courthouse steps. Some came to protest the charges against a popular politician who had brought millions in federal investment to their community, others to demand justice for the Harrison family. Robert Harrison stood silently among the crowd, watching as the man who had ordered his son's deaths was led away in handcuffs. 15 years of searching had led to this moment, and while it brought no satisfaction, it offered something more precious: the truth about why his boys had died. The media frenzy that followed Caldwell's arrest revealed the true scope of the corruption scandal. Investigative journalists uncovered a network of shell companies, inflated contracts, and political payoffs that stretched across multiple states. The Harrison twins had stumbled onto something much larger than simple payroll fraud. They had discovered evidence of a conspiracy that had been stealing from America's nuclear security infrastructure for years. The trial of Thomas Caldwell became a media sensation that exposed the dark underbelly of small-town politics and federal contract corruption. National news outlets descended on Oak Ridge, transforming the quiet community into the epicenter of a story about greed, murder, and the ultimate price of speaking truth to power. The Harrison twins, who had been forgotten by the world for 15 years, suddenly became symbols of integrity in an age of corruption. Jury selection took 3 weeks as prosecutors and defense attorneys battled over potential jurors who had been influenced by the massive media coverage. The final jury consisted of 12 East Tennessee residents who had no connection to Oak Ridge's political establishment, including a retired nuclear engineer who understood the gravity of safety violations at nuclear facilities, a small business owner who had dealt with government contract fraud, and a mother of twins who broke down in tears during voir dire when she imagined losing her own children. Jake Morrison's testimony as the prosecution's star witness provided the courtroom with a blow-by-blow account of the conspiracy that had claimed the twins' lives. His description of the November 17th murders was so detailed and emotionally devastating that several jurors wept openly. Morrison had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal that would see him serve 25 years in prison, a sentence that would likely mean he would die behind bars. "I followed Tommy Caldwell's orders because I was scared," Morrison testified, his voice barely audible as he faced the Harrison family for the first time since the twins' funeral 15 years earlier. He made it clear that anyone who threatened the money flow would end up like Mike and Matt. "I thought I was protecting my own family, but I destroyed theirs instead. There's not a day that goes by that I don't see those boys' faces, don't hear Michael asking me why I was doing this to them." Morrison's testimony revealed details that made even seasoned prosecutors sick to their stomachs. He described how the twins had begged for their lives, how Michael had tried to shield his brother even as the hired killers raised their weapons, how Matthew had called out for their parents in his final moments. The killers had laughed at the brothers' pleas, Morrison testified, treating the murders like a routine business transaction. The prosecution painted a picture of systematic corruption that had stolen millions of dollars from programs designed to protect nuclear workers and ensure environmental safety. Expert witnesses testified about the safety equipment that was never purchased, the environmental monitoring that was never conducted, and the worker training programs that existed only on paper. Dr. Sarah Chen, a nuclear safety expert from the University of Tennessee, testified that the missing safety funds had created conditions that could have led to catastrophic accidents affecting thousands of people. Federal prosecutor Maria Santos presented evidence showing that Caldwell had used his political influence to suppress at least 3 other whistleblowers over the years. 2 former Henderson construction employees had been fired and blacklisted from the industry after raising safety concerns. A third, an environmental inspector named David Park, had died in a suspicious house fire in 2012 after threatening to expose illegal waste dumping at nuclear facility construction sites. Caldwell's defense team, led by Nashville attorney Richard Maxwell, attempted to portray him as a scapegoat, a politician who had been manipulated by more sophisticated criminals. They argued that Morrison was lying to reduce his own sentence, that the evidence had been contaminated by 15 years of exposure to the elements, and that their client had been a dedicated public servant who had brought millions in federal investment to Oak Ridge. Maxwell painted Morrison as the real mastermind, claiming that Caldwell had been an unwitting victim of a construction supervisor's greed. But the paper trail was too extensive, Morrison's testimony too detailed, and the physical evidence too damning to overcome. The prosecution produced phone records showing dozens of calls between Caldwell and Morrison in the days surrounding the murders, bank records documenting suspicious transfers of funds, and recorded conversations in which Caldwell discussed expanding the corruption scheme to other contractors. The moment that sealed Caldwell's fate came when the prosecution played a recorded phone conversation between the defendant and Morrison from December 2009, just weeks after the twins' murders. Caldwell could be heard discussing plans to expand the corruption scheme to other federal contractors, joking about how the Harrison problem had been solved permanently and speculating about which other workers might need to be dealt with if they asked too many questions. The callousness in his voice as he discussed the deaths of two young men made even his own defense attorneys visibly uncomfortable. Robert Harrison was asked to provide a victim impact statement before sentencing, an opportunity to address the man who had destroyed his family. Standing at the podium in the packed courtroom, the man who had spent 15 years being dismissed as a grief-stricken father finally had his moment to speak for his murdered sons. "You didn't just kill Michael and Matthew," Robert said, looking directly at Caldwell. "You killed the future they should have had, the families they should have raised, the good they could have done in this world. You killed my marriage, my faith in justice, and my faith in humanity. But you didn't kill their memory, and you didn't kill the truth. My boys died because they couldn't stay silent when they saw people being cheated and endangered. Their integrity cost them their lives, but it also brought you to justice." Linda Harrison also addressed the court, her voice strong despite 15 years of grief. "Every Christmas morning for 15 years, I set out stockings for my boys, hoping they would come home. Every birthday I baked cakes they would never eat. You stole their lives, and you stole our ability to grieve properly, to say goodbye, to bury our children with dignity. You made us live in limbo, wondering if they were alive somewhere, suffering, needing us. That torture was worse than knowing they were dead." On November 17, 2024, exactly 15 years after Michael and Matthew Harrison disappeared, Thomas Caldwell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for their murders. The additional federal charges for corruption and conspiracy added another 40 years to his sentence, ensuring that he would never again pose a threat to anyone's safety. Jake Morrison received his 25-year sentence as agreed, while the two hired killers from Atlanta were tracked down and arrested, facing their own life sentences in Georgia's maximum security prison system. The courtroom was packed with Oak Ridge residents who had followed the case from the beginning, many of whom remembered the Harrison twins as promising young men who had deserved so much better than the fate that had claimed them. Linda Harrison, who had returned from Knoxville to attend every day of the trial, wept as the judge read Caldwell's sentence. For the first time in 15 years, she felt that justice had been served for her sons, though no sentence could ever truly balance the scales of what had been taken from their family. Judge Patricia Williams, who had presided over the 3-week trial, delivered remarks that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. "This case represents the ultimate corruption of public trust," she said, looking directly at Caldwell as she pronounced sentence. "You were elected to serve the people of Oak Ridge, to protect their interests and their safety. Instead, you stole from programs designed to protect workers at one of our nation's most critical nuclear facilities. When two young men discovered your crimes and threatened to expose them, you had them murdered in cold blood. Your actions represent a betrayal not just of the Harrison family, but of every citizen who trusted you with their safety." The corruption scandal led to a complete overhaul of Oak Ridge's government contracts and oversight procedures. Federal investigators discovered that the scheme had stolen over $12 million from worker safety and environmental protection programs, money that was ordered to be repaid to the Department of Energy with interest. Several other city officials were indicted for their roles in the conspiracy, including Deputy Mayor Carol Stevens and Public Works Director James Hunt, both of whom received lengthy prison sentences. The Tennessee State Legislature passed the Harrison Act in 2025, strengthening whistleblower protections for employees of federal contractors and creating new oversight mechanisms for nuclear facility construction projects. The law specifically protects workers who report safety violations, financial irregularities, or environmental crimes, making it a federal offense to retaliate against such whistleblowers. The bill was signed into law by the governor at a ceremony attended by Robert and Linda Harrison. Robert Harrison used the settlement money from wrongful death lawsuits against Henderson Construction and the city of Oak Ridge to establish the Michael and Matthew Harrison Foundation, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and supporting families of murder victims. The foundation's first project was funding a memorial garden at the site where the twins' remains were discovered, transforming a place of death into a symbol of hope and remembrance. The garden features twin oak trees planted side by side, their branches intertwining as they grow, symbolizing the unbreakable bond between the brothers. Every November 17th, the anniversary of their disappearance, the community gathers at the Memorial Garden to honor two young men who died for doing what was right. The ceremony has become one of Oak Ridge's most attended annual events, with hundreds of people coming to remember the Harrison twins and to recommit themselves to the values of honesty and integrity that the brothers had died defending. The case changed Detective Webb's career trajectory as well. His meticulous investigation of a 15-year-old cold case earned him recognition from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and led to his appointment as the state's new cold case coordinator. He keeps a photo of Michael and Matthew Harrison on his desk, a reminder that persistence and dedication can bring justice even when hope seems lost. Webb has since reopened 17 other cold cases across Tennessee, using lessons learned from the Harrison investigation to pursue justice for other forgotten victims. Linda and Robert Harrison never remarried, but the trial brought them back together in a way that grief alone never could. They work together now at the foundation, channeling their pain into purpose and their loss into a legacy that honors their son's memory. The house that had been a shrine to the missing became a center for healing, where other families dealing with unsolved murders could find support and advocacy. They host monthly support groups, maintain a 24-hour crisis hotline, and provide financial assistance to families who cannot afford private investigators or legal representation. The Harrison Foundation has helped solve 6 other cold cases across Tennessee, providing resources and expertise to families who had been abandoned by the system. The Foundation's investigators, many of them retired law enforcement officers working pro bono, used the same methodical approach that Webb employed to crack the Harrison case. They have become known throughout the Southeast as the last resort for families whose cases have been forgotten by official channels. The Harrison twins' story became a cautionary tale about the price of corruption and the power of ordinary people to expose extraordinary evil. Their names are now engraved on a monument at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, recognizing them as heroes who died protecting their fellow workers. The inscription reads simply, "Michael and Matthew Harrison, they chose truth over silence. November 17, 1987, November 17, 2009. The monument was unveiled on the twins' 37th birthday in a ceremony attended by over 1,000 people, including nuclear workers from across the Southeast who came to honor two young men they had never met but whose sacrifice had made their own workplaces safer. The ceremony featured speakers from the Department of Energy, the Tennessee congressional delegation, and nuclear safety advocates who praised the Harrison twins as heroes whose deaths had led to meaningful reforms in an industry that had operated in shadows for too long. 15 years after two young men disappeared on their way home from work, their voices had finally been heard. The silence that had protected their killers was broken. The conspiracy that had claimed their lives was exposed, and their legacy became a beacon of hope for anyone who believes that truth and justice can prevail against even the most powerful forces of corruption. In the end, Michael and Matthew Harrison got exactly what they had been fighting for: a safe workplace, honest government, and a community where doing the right thing doesn't cost you your life. Their deaths, while tragic and senseless, had ultimately made their community and their nation more just. They had lost their lives, but won the war against corruption that had claimed them. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases across America. Thank you for following the story of Michael and Matthew Harrison. See you in the next video. 5 years have passed since Thomas Caldwell received his life sentence for the murders of Michael and Matthew Harrison. The case that began with a father's desperate search along a Tennessee riverbank has become something far greater than anyone could have imagined, a catalyst for change that continues to reverberate through the halls of power, the hearts of families, and the conscience of a nation that had forgotten the price of silence. Oak Ridge today bears little resemblance to the community that allowed corruption to flourish in its shadows for over a decade. The city hall that once housed Caldwell's administration has been completely restructured, with new transparency requirements, citizen oversight committees, and whistleblower protection protocols that serve as a model for municipalities across the Southeast. Every government contract over $50,000 must now be approved by a civilian review board, and all meetings related to federal projects are live-streamed to the public. The changes came too late for Michael and Matthew Harrison, but they ensure that no other young men will die, for asking the right questions about the wrong people. The Michael and Matthew Harrison Foundation has grown beyond anything Robert and Linda Harrison could have envisioned in their darkest days of grief. What began as a small non-profit dedicated to supporting families of murder victims has evolved into a national organization with chapters in 12 states and an annual budget of over $3 million. The foundation operates the country's most successful cold case investigation unit outside of law enforcement, with a team of retired detectives, forensic specialists, and data analysts who work pro bono to solve cases that have been abandoned by overwhelmed police departments. In the 5 years since the Harrison case was resolved, the Foundation's investigators have helped solve 43 cold cases across the United States, bringing closure to families who had given up hope and justice to killers who thought they had escaped punishment. Their success rate has attracted attention from the FBI, which now regularly consults with the Foundation on particularly challenging cases. The Harrison model, combining civilian determination with professional expertise, has become the gold standard for private investigation of unsolved murders. Detective Marcus Webb, now Tennessee's Director of Cold Case Investigations, credits the Harrison case with transforming how law enforcement approaches forgotten crimes. Before Mike and Matt, we treated cold cases like lost causes. Webb reflects from his Nashville office, where photos of the Harrison twins still hold a place of honor on his desk. The Harrison investigation showed us that with enough determination and the right resources, even 15-year-old cases can be solved. We've restructured our entire approach based on what we learned from that case. The Tennessee Cold Case Unit, established in direct response to the Harrison case, has solved over 200 previously unsolved murders since its inception. The unit's protocols, developed from Webb's meticulous investigation of the twins' disappearance, have been adopted by cold case units in 37 states. The Harrison method, a systematic approach to re-examining physical evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, and leveraging modern technology to analyze old cases, has become standard practice in police academies across the country. Robert Harrison, now 71, has found a purpose in his pain that gives meaning to the 15 years of searching that preceded his son's discovery. He travels the country speaking at law enforcement conferences, victim rights seminars, and university criminology programs, sharing the lessons learned from his family's tragedy. His presentations, titled "Never Give Up: A Father's Search for Truth," have been viewed over 2 million times on YouTube and have inspired hundreds of families to resume their own searches for missing loved ones. "I used to think my boys died for nothing," Robert says during a recent interview at the Memorial Garden, where Michael and Matthew's remains were discovered. "Now I know they died for everything, for justice, for truth, for the principle that ordinary people have the right to be safe at work without being murdered for asking questions. Their deaths saved lives by exposing the corruption that put nuclear workers at risk. They may not have lived to see it, but they won the fight they started." Linda Harrison has channeled her grief into becoming one of the nation's most effective advocates for families of murder victims. Her testimony before Congress in 2026 led to the passage of the Federal Victims' Rights Enhancement Act, which provides federal funding for victim advocacy programs and establishes minimum standards for murder investigations. Linda's quiet strength and eloquent advocacy have made her a sought-after speaker at conferences and a trusted advisor to legislators crafting victim rights legislation. The divorced couple, brought back together by their shared mission, remarried in a simple ceremony at the Memorial Garden on November 17, 2027, the 18th anniversary of their son's disappearance. The ceremony was attended by over 500 people, including many families whose own cases had been solved with help from the Harrison Foundation. The remarriage symbolized not just personal healing, but the triumph of love over loss, hope over despair, and purpose over pain. Jake Morrison died in prison in 2028, 3 years into his 25-year sentence. Fellow inmates, learning of his role in murdering 2 young men who were trying to protect their co-workers, had made his life a constant nightmare of threats and violence. Morrison's death was ruled a suicide, though many questioned whether he had truly taken his own life or simply given up trying to protect himself from the consequences of his crimes. His final letter, sent to the Harrison family just days before his death, contained a single sentence: "I hope you can forgive me someday, because I never will." Thomas Caldwell remains in maximum security prison in Nashville, where he will spend the rest of his life. Reports from guards indicate that the former mayor, once charismatic and commanding, has become a broken man who spends his days reading religious texts and writing letters of apology that he never sends. His wife divorced him and moved to Florida with their children, who legally changed their names to escape the stigma of their father's crimes. Caldwell's political legacy has been completely erased. Buildings named in his honor have been renamed, scholarships bearing his name have been discontinued, and his portrait was removed from Oak Ridge City Hall and replaced with a memorial plaque honoring Michael and Matthew Harrison. The two hired killers from Atlanta, identified through Morrison's confession and physical evidence found at the burial site, were convicted in Georgia and sentenced to life without parole. Their arrests led to the discovery of a murder-for-hire ring that had operated across the Southeast for over 2 decades, resulting in 43 additional murder charges and the conviction of 6 other conspirators. The Harrison case had not only brought justice for 2 young men, but had dismantled an entire criminal organization that had operated in the shadows for years. The impact of the Harrison case extended far beyond criminal justice reform. The nuclear industry, shaken by revelations that safety funds had been systematically stolen from Oak Ridge projects, implemented comprehensive oversight reforms that have prevented similar corruption at nuclear facilities across the country. The Department of Energy established the Harrison Protocol, requiring independent verification of all safety expenditures at nuclear facilities and creating protected channels for workers to report safety violations without fear of retaliation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the nuclear safety expert who testified at Caldwell's trial, now heads the Michael and Matthew Harrison Institute for Nuclear Worker Safety at the University of Tennessee. The institute, funded by settlements from the lawsuits following the twins' murders, conducts research on nuclear workplace safety and trains the next generation of nuclear safety inspectors. The institute's graduates, known as Harrison Fellows, are specifically trained to identify and report safety violations, ensuring that the twins' legacy continues to protect nuclear workers decades after their deaths. The memorial garden where the twins' remains were discovered has become a pilgrimage site for families of murder victims from across the country. The garden, maintained by volunteers from the Oak Ridge community, features not just the twin oak trees planted in memory of Michael and Matthew, but also a reflecting pool surrounded by plaques honoring other murder victims whose cases were solved with help from the Harrison Foundation. The garden's guest book contains thousands of entries from visitors who found hope and inspiration in the story of 2 young men who died for doing what was right. Every November 17th, the anniversary vigil at the Memorial Garden draws larger crowds than the year before. The 2029 vigil, marking 20 years since the twins' disappearance, was attended by over 3,000 people, including nuclear workers from across the country, law enforcement officers who had worked cold cases, families whose own cases had been solved, and ordinary citizens who were inspired by the Harrison family's refusal to give up hope. The speakers at the 20th anniversary vigil included the governor of Tennessee, who announced the establishment of November 17th as Whistleblower Protection Day throughout the state, and the director of the FBI, who revealed that the Harrison investigation techniques had been incorporated into the Bureau's training programs for cold case investigators. But the most powerful speech came from Linda Harrison, whose words echoed across the silent crowd and seemed to speak directly to her sons. Michael and Matthew, your mother and father want you to know that your deaths were not in vain. You died because you couldn't stay silent when you saw injustice. You died because you believed that right should triumph over wrong, that truth should defeat lies, that ordinary people deserve to be safe at work and protected by their government. Your deaths exposed corruption that threatened thousands of lives. Your legacy has brought justice to dozens of other families. Your memory continues to inspire people to speak up, to ask questions, to refuse to accept that might makes right. We miss you every day. We will always wonder what kind of men you would have become, what kind of families you would have raised, what kind of good you would have done in the world. But we know that you are still doing good, still fighting injustice, still protecting the innocent through the work that continues in your names. You are not gone, as long as people remember that courage is worth the cost, that truth is worth defending, and that some principles are worth dying for. As the vigil concluded, and the crowd slowly dispersed into the Tennessee twilight, Robert and Linda Harrison remained by their son's memorial, holding hands and sharing memories of two young men who had lived only 22 years, but whose impact would last forever. They had begun their marriage as parents of twins, had nearly lost that marriage in the agony of not knowing what had happened to their children, and had found their way back to each other through the mission of ensuring that no other family would suffer as they had suffered. The Harrison case continues to generate new developments, even 5 years after its resolution. In 2029, investigative journalists uncovered evidence that the corruption scheme that killed the twins had connections to similar operations in 3 other states, leading to new federal investigations and additional arrests. The case that began with the disappearance of 2 construction workers in a small Tennessee town had revealed a national network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government contracting. Michael and Matthew Harrison rest now in Oak Ridge Cemetery, their shared headstone bearing the simple inscription their parents chose: "Beloved sons and brothers, they chose truth over silence." The cemetery, once a place of grief and unanswered questions, has become a site of pilgrimage for those who believe that ordinary people can make an extraordinary difference in the world. The truth that the Harrison twins died seeking has been found. The justice their family fought for has been achieved. The corruption they tried to expose has been rooted out and punished. But perhaps their greatest victory is not in the convictions of their killers or the reforms their deaths inspired, but in the simple fact that they are remembered not as victims, but as heroes who paid the ultimate price for their principles. In a world that often seems to reward cynicism over idealism, corruption over integrity, and silence over courage, the story of Michael and Matthew Harrison stands as proof that good can triumph over evil, that truth can defeat lies, and that sometimes the most ordinary people can achieve the most extraordinary things. They were just 2 young men trying to do the right thing, but they changed the world by refusing to compromise their values, even when it cost them their lives. Their story is ended, but their legacy lives on in every whistleblower who speaks up despite the risks, every investigator who refuses to give up on a cold case, every family who finds the courage to keep searching for truth in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Michael and Matthew Harrison died at 22, but they will live forever in the hearts of all who believe that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way to the light.